Hello folks, and welcome to the Alaska Landmines Mayoral Runoff debate. We're joined here by Forrest Dunbar. Unfortunately, Dave Bronson is not here. We invited both candidates on April 16th to attend the debate. We gave options for flexibility on dates. The Dunbar campaign responded very quickly and said they were available to be here at a variety of dates. The Bronson campaign did not respond immediately. Several days later, I sent a follow-up email, talked to some folks in the campaign. And again, there was no response. Finally, they said they weren't interested because of timing and issues. We offered different dates and times, and they then said they didn't want to interact with the Anchorage Police Department Employee Association, who's a sponsor of our debate, and specifically Jeremy Conkling, who we then offered to be have not part of the debate to ask questions about public safety. So there are the emails you can see. We tried very hard to get Mr. Bronson to be here for the debate for our viewers. Thousands of politically engaged viewers here in Anchorage for this runoff debate. So while Dave wasn't able to attend and we did give him ample opportunity, we do have him here in another form because we do want to make sure that he's here in some form or another for our viewers. So he'll be popping up there throughout the debate. But for now, we're joined here by Forrest Dunbar, candidate from the runoff. You're in the runoff now, and There was a very loaded up field, 15 candidates in the first round. And it was a very close margin, about 33% between you and Bronson. He was a little bit above you in the first round, and there was different kind of conservatives and progressive candidates. So welcome, thank you for being here. And I want to start off by giving you some time to introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for mayor and how you feel about being in the runoff.
Sure, well, thank you for having me here tonight. And thank you. For those that don't know me, my name is Forrest Dunbar, and I'm running for mayor to get us through the end part of this public health crisis and get our economy back on track. I grew up in rural Alaska, but I've served the last 5 years representing East Anchorage on the Anchorage Assembly. We've gone through a really, really tough year, but I believe that our best days are still ahead of us. And we get there through concrete plans, through real leadership, through fact-based leadership, through building coalitions and working together. That's why I'm running for mayor, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks, Forrest. The first topic I want to go into is COVID. Obviously, a year of shutdowns and the pandemic affected a lot of businesses and folks here in Anchorage. The Assembly this week, which you're on, voted to rescind or roll back most of the provisions except the mask mandate. Some folks have said that might have been a political calculation close to the election. Can you talk about that? And was that political? And if elected, do you plan going forward having easing up the restrictions?
Well, I've been saying for months that I think that the new mayor who will be sworn in on July 1st will likely, the emergency declaration will likely be over by then. But, he said the virus gets a vote, unfortunately. And if there is a large explosion in number of cases, it's certainly possible that emergency declaration could be extended. I don't think it's very likely. And what happened a week ago was actually just the extension of a number of gradual steps that go back till March. So EO 19 was passed by the mayor in early March, and that went to 100% capacity. Then the first meeting in April, we had EO 20, which got rid of the outdoor restrictions and set the vaccine goal. And that emergency declaration only passed 6-4. And I was actually advocating at that time with the mayor's office that we should do what we did a week ago, which was convert a number of the other existing social distancing requirements to recommendations. And then finally, last week, by unanimous vote, the Assembly did that. So it's just the continuation of this gradual reopening that's been going on, arguably since January, but certainly since March. So no, it wasn't like it actually wasn't that large of a change. The truth is, the really large change happened in the beginning of March. It just wasn't covered in quite that way. And yeah.
You mentioned the percentage. So Acting Mayor Quinn Davidson had said that she wants us to get to 70% vaccination rate to basically undo everything and fully open up. Do you support the 70%? And if you're elected, is that kind of the goal you'd want to shoot for?
The important thing is that it's a goal, not a mandate, right? And so that was one path towards removing our the public health mandates. It wasn't the only path. And actually why there was a unanimous vote last week was because we had additional 2 weeks of falling case numbers, falling hospitalizations, no deaths, and increased vaccinations. So the last I saw, we were above 55% had at least their first shot here in Anchorage. A number of other places around the state are well above 60, already approaching 70. Actually, some of the villages are at 100, but that's a little bit of a different set of circumstances. And some other states, like New Hampshire, for example, are already in the high 60s. So I think it's an achievable goal. It's a goal we should strive to reach for, but it's not the absolute requirement. We could see the emergency declaration end before we get to it if we continue to see a reduction in cases and a reduction in hospitalizations and no deaths, right? Because we're able to at least vaccinate our most vulnerable residents.
Starting last summer, we saw with the CARES Act money and kind of, I guess it's started off with the 4 buildings for the homelessness and the drug addiction. That kind of spun up a very kind of angry group. The Save Anchorage group kind of spun off from that. There's Dave Bronson, in a lot of ways, it was a result of that kind of.
Well, there literally was an article in the ADN, I think, that says Dave Bronson launches campaign with Save Anchorage support. I mean, he was absolutely part of that movement, and his campaign is still very much coordinating with Save Anchorage. Yeah.
So sitting on the Assembly and having seen all that over the summer and the fall,
yeah.
If elected mayor, how do you kind of see yourself helping or healing that division and uniting the community, which is in some ways very divided over the coronavirus and back then the CARES Act funding?
I agree. I think that our campaign has tried to build a broad coalition of people from all different political backgrounds, and I'm very fortunate. We announced last week that we have a number of people that worked for the Bill Evans campaign are now working for our campaign, and a number of Bill Evans supporters, and of course we have people that worked for Bill Falsey and George Martinez, and I think we'll get a lot of different support from across the political spectrum. I do think, as I mentioned, I think the new mayor, whoever it is, by July 1st, we hope to have this largely behind us. And if that's the case, then I think that, some of the reaction was to this really unique event. I mean, nobody wanted to do these public health mandates, right? This was because of this black swan pandemic, this truly unique event. But I'm hopeful that it will continue to be reduced by increasing vaccinations and by, frankly, the onset of summer and people being able to go outside. So I do think that the tensions will be able to be reduced. And I'll say, it's interesting. The interactions right now between the Assembly and the people who come and testify are very toxic, and certainly the interactions on Facebook are very toxic. People tend to seem to be their worst selves on Facebook. But when I go to community councils and when I meet people face to face, when I get the chance, people usually aren't that aggressive, And I think when I first got on the Assembly, certainly 5 years ago, and I think just Anchorage in general, we tend to be a little more neighborly because it's a big city by Alaskan standards, but it's still a pretty small town. You will meet people in Fred Meyer. You will meet people at sporting events. Like, we know each other. We live near each other. And so I do think that as the emergency orders are reduced, we'll have a chance to have a little bit of a reset and be able to build those bridges again.
Well, and certainly, there is division definitely at the Assembly meetings, but from my perspective, Felix Rivera was on the ballot to be recalled, and he wasn't recalled. So that, to me, was an interesting kind of measure of maybe how things really are compared to maybe the Assembly meetings where they've gotten to be pretty kind of contentious.
That was a really interesting case, and obviously I supported Felix and opposed his recall. But I mean, those buildings that were going to be purchased, Not all with the CARES Act, of course. One of them was purchased with MLMP money as part of a settlement with Providence Hospital before the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. That was the Golden Lion, and unfortunately the administration sort of conflated the two. But that was a separate issue that had to do with treatment that was mandated by the MLMP sale. Anyway, that was in his district, so you think the opposition would be most sort of fired up in his district, and indeed they got the recall on the ballot, and yet he beat it pretty solidly, which I was surprised by, to be honest.
The last thing on COVID, I want to talk about the American Rescue Plan funds, the ARPA funds, where Anchorage is getting set to get well over $100 million. If elected, you're going to be, overseeing a lot of that. What were some lessons maybe from the CARES Act funds and some of the division that was created?
Yeah.
And how do you see those funds being used, and what were some lessons you learned about these buildings specifically, about how this money gets spent in the community?
It's a good question. I would say that the
we got a few good ones.
Yeah. The first thing we learned is you had to communicate things clearly and get in front of things, because they say a lie can get around the world twice before the truth gets its shoes on. And I think a lot of people still think that a majority or even a significant chunk of CARES Act money went to purchase those buildings, when the truth is it was less than 10%. And the vast majority of CARES Act money went to small business grants, went to mortgage relief, went to gift cards that could be used on food and fuel and diapers and things that people really needed. So the vast majority of CARES Act money went right back into the community. But my point is, so we have to communicate clearly what we're doing. That's number one. Number two, there still is, so the Rescue Plan Act funds will come in two big batches, $50 million each, one this year, one next year. And of that, half of this year, I'm hoping we can go towards clearing the backlog that was created in the CARES Act funds. So small business grants, nonprofit grants, the aforementioned gift card program, we still have waiting lists. So I think the priority should be to first clear out those waiting lists and quickly get that money on the street, because that was another big lesson from the CARES Act. It takes a really long time to administer programs and set up applications and actually get the money out to folks. So the Assembly would approve, $10 million or whatever it was to small business. It would take 2 or 3 months to actually get the money on the street. And it wasn't because there was anything nefarious going on. It just takes a long time to set up these processes. And there's relatively few people in the administration to do it. And so my goal is to use the existing application and the existing processes to more quickly get the money on the street.
Last thing on the CARES Act, do you feel, specifically for the 4 buildings, do you feel the Berkowitz administration at the time rushed it, or maybe there was a lack of process? A lot of folks, that was a complaint of a lot of people, was they didn't feel like there was a process, and it just kind of happened, and it was like, here you go, this is what you get.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of miscommunication. I mean, they went through the normal process of introducing something at the Assembly and having public hearings. And of course, the decision to put a day center in Midtown was something that was, for years, the Midtown Community Council had been asking the administration to do. But as you know, the community council and community councils are often a relatively small group of people relative to who actually lives in the neighborhood.
I was president of Taco Campbell and
right.
the FCC as well, so I know how that.
Right, and so sometimes you'll think like, well, we're going through the process. Everybody, community council knows, but the broader neighborhood really isn't plugged in. And when they find out, they get mad at the Assembly. They also get mad at the community council. I'm sure you probably experienced that once or twice.
No, I remember when in my case, the Al's Bar, the train, remember that years ago?
No.
They put a big train outside of, anyways.
Okay.
We had 3, 4, 10 people at a regular meeting, and we had meetings where there was 80 or 100 people.
Right, exactly.
I mean, really, content, wow, what am I doing here?
Right, and so I think a couple of mistakes that were made. One was, again, conflating the MLMP project with the CARES Act money. And then, I think there was sort of an over-reliance on the typical process rather than recognizing this was atypical. And then also there were little things like they introduced an ordinance to do the B3 zoning change, and then we combined the public hearing, so it was 6 minutes instead of 3, and it turned into this, pretty contentious issue. But I think we've learned some lessons, and I'm hopeful that sort of thing won't happen with the Rescue Plan Act funds.
I want to move on and talk about homelessness.
First,
I want to make sure that there's 5 people here in the Landmine Jensen Hall studio, and we all are vaccinated, just so everybody is aware of that. So fully vaxxed. I'm the Moderna. Are you Moderna? Or are you?
Moderna.
Did you have COVID?
No.
I had a positive COVID in December, but asymptomatic. So
I was. I was tested a couple times, never tested positive, and then the National Guard was who vaccinated me. I mean, a lot of soldiers were vaccinated through the Army National Guard, and I was fortunate enough to get one of those relatively early.
All right, I want to go into homelessness. So obviously this is maybe the issue, one of the major issue facing the state in this election. public wants this solved. We all want this solved.
Yeah.
Is it worse overall, or is it just worse visibly? And if so, why? And then how do we? This is the big one that nobody can seem to fix. But how do we start to solve this problem?
Yeah, I think it's worse than it was. Well, I'll say this. Before the pandemic, I actually think we were making gradual progress, and you could see the numbers were falling slightly year over year, and it looked like we were getting somewhere. Not as fast as we would have liked, and there was still a lot more to do, but I think that we were making sort of gradual progress, and that's what the statistics suggested. But then, COVID hit, threw a wrench in everything. The number of people who are housing insecure really increased. And right now, clearly we're in a really tough spot. There are 400 people at the Sullivan Mass Shelter facility. There's another 300 to 400 that are at different hotels around town being paid for using mostly FEMA funds. And there's going to be a real crisis if someone comes in without any plan and just sort of shuts those things down.
Well, that's one of my questions.
Okay, go ahead.
On September 30th, the Sullivan Arena funding runs out. So that's one of the questions one of those great questions we have. Thanks to some help here from some great people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Carolyn. What's the plan after September 30th when it's going to be winter and you're going to have hundreds of people essentially back on the streets again?
Yeah. I actually had a great conversation with, we've been having conversations between the administration and the assembly on exactly this topic, and they are putting together a fairly comprehensive plan. The early part of the plan looks like this. First of all, you need intensive case management, and we are going to dedicate a portion of we're likely going to dedicate a portion of the Rescue Plan Act funds to that. That has been one of the real shortcomings. We can get people housed, but then they fail and fall out of housing really quickly. You need someone there to sort of work with them to keep them housed. The good news is we learned a lot from the Sullivan Mass Care Facility. We learned that you have to have a centralized place where people can access employment, treatment, temporary housing, and long-term supportive housing. We've had that on site at the Sullivan. And you probably heard that Rasmussen and Widener are planning to buy the old Beans Cafe building. The plan is that a facility like that will be there. And the idea is you can quickly get people out of shelter and into housing. So, and we have additional funds to do that. We have $7 to $8 million of HUD funds that are coming our way. We have the alcohol tax revenue, although it's only going to be a relatively small portion. And we have additional private funds from people like the Rasmussen Foundation. So again, we're quickly getting people out of shelter. There was a time in Anchorage when shelter was kind of seen as the end of the line. And what we've realized now in recent years is it has to be a really temporary sort of waypoint on the way to housing. Shelter is not the answer. That is, the congregate shelters like Brother Francis. So one of the reasons there was more visible homelessness, and one of the reasons we had to have the Sullivan Mass Care Facility, is because under the CDC regulations, you had to have 6 foot of distance between where people were sleeping. And so facilities like Brother Francis and the Gospel Rescue Mission and other places, they had to reduce their number of beds really significantly. And that's what caused this real shortage. We expect to have a couple of those increase the number of beds again, but not to what they were before. What was down at Brother Francis, 3rd and Carlick, I don't believe through a fault of Catholic Social Services or Brother Francis themselves, but basically through us, through our community and through the municipality. We were asking them to have 240 individuals down there in a building that probably could house 120, twice what they should be housing. And so that caused really severe problems at 3rd and Carlick. I mean, 3rd and Carlick, what was down there was totally unacceptable, and we can't have that again. So I think that's one of the lessons we've learned is 3rd and Carlick looks much different today than it did even a year ago, or a year and a half ago. And we cannot allow that to develop
and that's
again.
one of the things I want to talk about. 2 years ago, I don't know if you saw, Scott Jensen and I, we made a mini documentary, This is Anchorage, about the homelessness problem. And we spent time, weeks, in all the camps, and 3rd and Carlick, which by far was the worst situation. To me, it seemed that the further you get away from 3rd and Carlick, the more independent people are, and the more maybe mentally they're just mentally ill, but they're just choosing in some cases to live in the woods. But in our video, we kind of I saw different issues. I saw housing. People need housing. Some of those people, we don't even see them visibly homeless because maybe they're staying on a friend's couch or they're staying at somebody's. They're staying temporarily somewhere.
Right.
There's housing issue. There's addiction, mental health. Some people have told us very clearly they chose to be there. And there's a criminal element, and I want to ask about that because we did see lots of bike parts and propane tanks and tools that were obviously they're pretty clearly stolen. Dave Bronson has talked a lot about treating this like a police problem in some ways. There is a criminal element in this homelessness problem. How much do you see the police being involved in solving the crisis? And other, how much do you see the other mental health treatment and drug addiction treatment being involved?
Well, I'll say, I think Mr. Bronson has this misconception that the police and the prosecutors don't currently go after that criminal element. That's just mistaken. The police absolutely do prosecute that when they can prove it. They make arrests, they prosecute people. If people are breaking the law, they are subject to the law. He has this conception that isn't happening already. We part of the alcohol tax fund was dedicated towards year-round camp abatement. So up until last year, and of course everything again got messed up because of COVID, up until last year we only did abatement during the summer. And then in the winter, these camps, in the fall even, these camps would really start to get larger and get sort of entrenched. Now, because of the alcohol tax funds, it's going to be a year-round. That was a major change just in the last year. But let me say, you cannot abate camps legally, and constitutionally, you can't abate camps unless there's somewhere for those folks to go. They have a right to live, a right to exist, which is why we have to have additional housing and additional treatment and additional shelter space as well. And I'll say that the Golden Lion, which was of course controversial, but it's been purchased. It will be largely funded through a Medicaid, I believe through the 1115 waiver at the state. But however it's funded, and there'll be some alcohol tax funds in there as well. That's that treatment portion we were talking about. Another thing you didn't mention that people should know is a lot of folks, not a lot, but a significant chunk of folks have traumatic brain injury, and there's these co-occurring issues. So it's mental health, it's brain injury, and it's alcohol or drugs all together.
I think some of them do overlap. I absolutely agree there's overlap.
And that the Golden Lion in particular is going to try to serve that community.
So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and do a public safety segment.
Okay.
But I want to thank you for being here. We're going to take a quick break, and folks, stay tuned for our next segment.
Do we want to get rid of Giant Bronson?
I think we'll get rid of Cardboard Dave for a little bit. All right, folks, we're back here with Forrest Dunbar. The Dave Bronson cutout is temporarily off screen. He'll be back later. We're going to go into a segment on public safety, and the APDEA, the Anchorage Police Department Employee Association, is our debate sponsor, and we've worked with them to come up with some questions on public safety, which again is an issue facing Anchorage. So
Yeah, absolutely.
the first question: there's 435 sworn officers in Anchorage, which is about 1.5 per 1,000 in the population.
Yeah.
This is an improvement than what it was years ago when we saw some cuts under Mayor Sullivan.
Yeah.
If you look at Anchorage's size with the average, it should be, according to several police kind of groups, 2.5 per 1,000. Meaning we'd have to add about 276 additional officers to get to the average.
Yeah.
And that's not, a complete picture. Some cities and towns have sheriffs and more of a state police presence. So if elected mayor, what steps would you take to bring APD to a higher staffing level? And do we need to do you agree with the 2.5 per 1,000 number?
I think that number would involve a very substantial increase in property taxes that I don't believe the people of Anchorage support.
Which we'll go into later on the property tax as well.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to, and because of the way the tax cap works, of course, we would probably have to decimate other parts of the municipality in order to get to that. We'd have to either cut down the fire department very significantly, or road maintenance, or get rid of basically every other department. I mean, police, fire, road maintenance, snow removal, right there, that's about 60% of your budget. So I don't think we're going to be able to get to that staffing ratio realistically, unless there's some other huge new source of revenue, which I don't anticipate. So I think it's going to be mostly about maintenance. So we spend about 22% of our city budget on municipal budget on police. There are other parts of the country that spend 39, 40, 41%. I mean, places like Los Angeles, Chicago, Charlotte. But I don't think that the people of Anchorage would support that substantial of a property tax increase, or the kind of closures you'd expect at the fire department or that kind of thing. But I'll say this. First of all, I don't support defunding the police. I mean, my record over the last 5 years has been I've supported every police academy, and I've helped grow by 100 sworn officers to this level. Also supported additional non-sworn staff like evidence clerks and dispatchers, and we've been able to reduce 911 call times, for example. And this was through the APD leadership, through partnerships with APDEA, through the assembly, and through the additional resources we put forward. I will say this, so I supported the creation of the Mental Health First Responders program.
This is the mental health people with police when they're going on certain calls.
No,
right?
it's actually housed in the fire department. So hopefully most dispatch cases, they won't be with police, they'll be independent of police. And they should reduce 7,000 calls out of the APD stack, the behavioral health calls. So the APD officers can focus more on the violent crime and property crime that only they can do. So we think that will both improve outcomes for our neighbors that are in crisis, but also reduce some of the pressure on APD. Because if you've done have you ever done a ride along?
I've done a few ride alongs.
Yeah, because
on a Friday night.
Yeah,
you see how crazy it is. How almost every interaction is a negative interaction.
So I've done a number of ride-alongs as well, and I think it's very clear that we go from domestic violence call to domestic violence call to domestic violence call some nights, but the point is there's just a huge stack. You're always going call to call. I mean, they're incredibly busy. I mean, this is the point. So we hope to make things a little bit less busy for them. We hope to maintain the level of staffing. I'll say this, I don't want to drop below that number, certainly. I could see perhaps a small increase if we could find a way to do it that didn't, again, decimate other parts of the municipal budget.
Well, I want to weigh in here on a personal, I think you probably know in 2012, my friend was murdered in front of Platinum Jacks, shot and killed in a very screwed up situation.
Yep.
And my takeaway from that was when I first got to Anchorage in 2004, a couple years later, I worked at Platinum Jacks actually. And back then there was beat cops walking around downtown.
Yeah.
And under Sullivan, we all know that police kind of academies were reduced and there wasn't as many police, and you stopped seeing the downtown beat cops walking around, especially on Halloween when my friend was killed, one of the busier nights.
Yeah.
And there was no police. It took 5 or 6 minutes for them to show up. So, the police presence in these situations where I think my friend might be alive today if there was police downtown that night.
The number one, when I'm going door knocking, and I've knocked on thousands of doors in East Anchorage, the number one complaint I get about APD is that they don't arrive fast enough, right? And that's a staffing issue, like you said. That's because there are challenges with the number of officers we have. Although I think the last time I went door knocking in my district was 2019 when I ran for re-election, and we've continued to improve the resources at APD since then. And we've done things like we the municipality, the APD really, they've stood up a cold case unit, for the first time in years. They do have more resources. They do have more officers, and my opponent has said, crime is spilling into our streets and crime is on the rise. Statistically, from the statistics we get from APD, crime spiked in about late 2017, and it's been falling ever since. Now, there's still too much crime. We still want to continue to improve our public safety. But the fact is, we are safer today than we were in 2017. We've been able to reduce crime in this city. And I think that the primary driver, there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I think one of the primary reasons is because we do have more officers now who can do follow-up, who can pursue more cases, and we do have some folks who are riding bikes on trails, for example, some police officers. And I think there is an on-foot beat downtown now, but I'm not totally sure about that. I thought that they had reconstituted that, but I could be mistaken.
I'm going to go to the next question. A recent national survey from Smart Asset showed that the Anchorage tax burden, while the property taxes are very high, the Anchorage tax burden is quite low compared to other cities over 250,000 people. That's because we don't have state income taxes or sales or local sales taxes. Yeah. And those figures don't take into the permanent fund dividend, which is another amount of income folks get. But at the same time, we've seen cuts in programs that have resulted in some fire station brownouts, reduced services to snow removal. I think we all see the snow removal as, at least I do in my neighborhood, being not as good as it used to be in the past. And we've talked about the few police officers, compared to that national average, where some folks want to get to. Do you support reducing taxes more? If you do, or cutting services to deal with some of these?
This would have been a great question for the person who is not here, because
he's in the corner, but we can bring him back later.
This is his plan, right? He wants to significantly reduce property taxes, but he hasn't identified what services he will cut. He did say he would cut the school district, but sort of generally. And he said, I'll cut nearly everything, but he needs to be more specific about what services he would cut, particularly if he wants to increase the number of police officers. That means he's going to have to close fire stations, or he's going to have to close the library, or he's going to have to really significantly reduce road maintenance and snow removal. That's the reality. Right now, we have a balanced budget. We have a balanced budget every year, and we've worked really hard. We have made targeted cuts. We have made cuts throughout the years to everything except the police department. But right now, and we've done things like pass a fuel tax, like sell MLMP and put the revenue into a trust that generates interest every year that can help to offset property taxes. We have diversified our revenue streams. We have decoupled ourselves largely from the state because we don't get as much state support. And right now we're balanced. We have a balanced budget. And I want to maintain that. I don't see significant new revenue unless the people of Anchorage vote for it, right? And I don't plan to bring forward a general sales tax. Now, if another group of leaders...
That's a later question I was going to ask you.
Yeah, okay.
Later segment we'll talk about the
right. That would be the other significant source of funds. But if you use it to offset property taxes, then you're sort of just holding yourself neutral in terms of whether you can deliver more services. I think right now we have worked really hard to try to deliver core public services without having undue property tax burden. I supported the increase of the residential property tax exemption. I strongly support the senior tax exemption. Right now, our biggest problem in Anchorage is we aren't building enough housing, right? So the price of housing has been skyrocketing. You probably know this summer, super hot.
You look at my notes. I feel like you.
No, but we know what the problems.
These are all the questions we're going to be talking.
We know what the problems in this city are. If you've been involved, if you've been working in municipal government, over the last several years the challenges we currently face. Right now, we're not building enough housing stock relative to demand.
And there's a problem with that right now with the price of lumber has increased by 200%. And right now the house goes on the market in Anchorage and it sells within hours. And oftentimes for higher
$50,000 over asking
than what they're asking. I had somebody call me a couple days ago and say, "Do you want to put your house back?" I was on the market briefly years ago. We have a buyer. Like I never got that kind of call before.
Right, and so that's causing, because the prices are rising so significantly, that's going to cause appraisals to rise, and that causes people. There are seniors right now who find it difficult to remain in their homes because the price of their home is so high.
Even when the house is paid off.
Yeah,
I've come
because they still have
Property
property taxes. So I support the residential property tax exemption. I support the senior property tax exemption. I don't support large cuts to municipal services right now. When I'm going door knocking, not many people say, snow removal gets here too quickly, for example, and that's where the money actually goes. I mean, this is the thing that they pretend, my opponent pretends like there's all this waste in the system, but he doesn't identify any of it. And again, the vast majority of our funds go to police, fire, snow removal, road maintenance. And then on top of that, you could add things like animal control, which by the way, there aren't a lot of animal control officers, and we get a lot of complaints that it takes too long, right? Parks and trails, which people really value here and do amazing work with relatively little funds. And then everything else, IT and the health department and, the cemetery, relatively few things. And then of course you have the utilities, which are a sort of separate set of funds.
We're going to talk about all those issues in a later segment, but I do want to go up to the next question on the Anchorage Police Department. They've had big recruitment problems, and a lot of that's due to the lack of a defined benefit pension system.
Right.
And what happens, we see on the state level too, officers after 3 or 5 years will get their training, which costs a couple $100,000, and they'll leave. And Bob Cockrell, who was Governor Dunleavy's recent appointed to the Commissioner of Public Safety, told the House State Affairs Committee that we're basically a recruiting ground and training ground for Western states.
Yeah.
So, what's the plan to address this problem? I know some of this is on a state level with a defined benefit, but do you think we should have a defined benefit for police and fire? And how do we get there? If not, how do we fix the recruitment problems?
I think we should have a defined benefit for public employees, period. I think Tier 4 has been really damaging to our community because we can't recruit and retain people the same way we used to. It's particularly acute amongst the police department and other public safety officers because they do get headhunted. Chuck Kopp, who I thought was a great representative, and I'm disappointed that he is no longer in the state legislature. He's the kind of more centrist person that
support a defined benefit.
That's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
He had a bill, I think it was HB 88.
It's all dead now.
I could be mistaken, but so he had a bill that we passed a resolution at the assembly supporting, that I support, that I would like to see resurrected, but it has to be done at the state level, unfortunately.
Last question on the public safety segment. The APDEA has remained neutral in the runoff. They did donate to you in the first round.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about some of the law enforcement kind of stories that were circulating last year. There was this kind of Moms for Dead Cops thing, which ended up not being a thing. It was some graffiti spray paint in Portland. But there was the Wall of Moms, which I think your mom was involved in. Or
My sister.
Your sister.
And my cousin.
And you supported that. And that was basically a way to get the protesters to not engage with the police. And that didn't really work that well. I mean, people want to do that. It's hard to, I guess, stop. But what I want to ask you is, we haven't seen these kind of problems in Anchorage with looting and destruction of property and rioting. But if that did happen here, if that does happen, what is the proper response for police to be able to handle those kind of things? Because in other towns, Portland, Seattle, DC, that's happened, and it has been a big concern for residents and business owners who live there.
Well, I don't support violent protests regardless of who is doing it. I don't support violent protests, and I said that during the summer, and I've said that repeatedly since then. And the Wall of Moms that my relatives participated in was not violent. Now,
they were trying to stop.
Right, they were trying to sort of have a barrier. They were only down there at a certain time. Anyway, we need to go into it. The point is, the question is about violent protests, which I don't support. And I don't think it's going to happen here. I mean, we made some smart tactical decisions last summer, and I talked to the police chief about it. First of all, we had community leaders, I think, that really want to build trust between the community and the police department. And it takes years, right, to build up this trust. So we had community leaders that led those protests that were not advocating violence at any point.
I was at several of them.
Right. And then we had a police department that was smart and tactical about the way they engaged. So they held back. I don't know if you remember, but there really wasn't a police presence at those things. Because I think what we found in some of these protests is if the police show up in force, it kind of, it can exacerbate things.
Well, there was one situation, this must have been 2 summers ago, at the Valley of the Moon Park where I was at. And it happened to be at a shift change, and there was a bunch of people that were camping there. Remember they were camping at the different parks around town? in 2019
Oh,
summer.
oh yeah,
And,
yes.
And that
They
was
were
a
on the
situation
Park
where
Strip, yeah.
I was there, and it was Valley of the Moon. They moved to the Valley of the Moon, and that was a situation where several cops did show up. I mean, there was probably 30 cops, and it was during a shift change, and it did get very intense.
Yeah.
And eventually it cooled down. There was a mental health person that went to try to talk to them, and it didn't get crazy, but I felt like it was pretty close to.
But so again, I guess the highlight for me is, one, I don't support violent protests, and if we had destruction of a building or we had violence breaking out, it's absolutely appropriate to have the police department be involved. But I don't think it's going to happen here in Anchorage, and it's because the police department and the community have worked really hard to build trust and to not engage in some of the things we've seen in other cities. But Justin Dahl, Chief Dahl, has said over and over, that you have to earn that trust again every day. Mm-hmm. And we have a real, we compensate relatively well, despite what you said about the pensions. We try to compensate our officers appropriately, and we train a lot, and we try to have really the best and the brightest. I mean, I think we have a high quality police department here, and we've been able to, and that helps mitigate, I think, some of those risks. But again, it takes communication and trust built between the community and the police department. That's the key.
Last thing I want to ask is, why do you think that Portland, Seattle, some of these Midwest towns, DC, why do you think they have those rioting, looting, destruction problems, and we don't see that here?
I don't really want to speculate too much. I grew up in Alaska, and I know about this community a little bit more. I haven't lived in those places, so I can't really speak to what was happening there. I will say that we have a little bit of a different historical legacy in Anchorage than other places. I mean, there's no question that racism existed and exists in Anchorage. I mean, you can still find pieces of land where the title will say, shall not be alienated to other than the white race. We know we had residential housing segregation here in Anchorage. Absolutely. We had that kind of thing in Anchorage. But I do think that we have worked to try to get through some of it. And I do think we have a little bit more of integrated communities than some other parts of the country. But again, I can't speak specifically to the historical context of those places because I haven't lived there. I did live in DC, but I was in college and a little bit of a, I was in college.
Having some drinks maybe.
Well, no, I mean, that's just that, but I wouldn't want to speak like I knew the real history of that place. Mm. I am from Alaska, and I love this community. I think it's a really special place. It's not a perfect place. It can always get better, and I think we're working to try to make it better. And we're really blessed to have community leaders in all of our different, communities in Anchorage that I think we're all sort of pulling on the same end of the rope. We're all here in Anchorage. We all want Anchorage to be a thriving place. We all want this to be, we think it's a special place, and we want it to be a vibrant
and that's
place.
a good segue to our next segment. We're going to talk about some of those issues. So,
okay.
We're going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about the budget, talk about downtown, and some other issues facing Anchorage. We're joined by Forrest Dunbar, and the cornerback there is Dave Bronson. We'll bring him out later in a different forum. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. All right, folks, we're back. Welcome to our mayoral debate with Forrest Dunbar and Dave Bronson, he's back in another form. Again, folks, we did invite Dave Bronson multiple times. We reached out to the campaign. We talked about that at the beginning of the show, and just did not want to participate. So we was hoping he was going to be here. He's not here, but we do have him in a different. Man, that thing's big. I got to say, the printer had an issue, and the machine actually printed it double size and then broke. That's what happened. The machine printed it 2x size, I guess, and then it broke. So that's why we have him here. He looks like the Prometheus engineer thing. And again, I want to say that everybody in the room here is all fully vaccinated. So Team Moderna, we're very excited about that. I want to go into downtown and talk about kind of downtown and then Anchorage in general, revitalizing and attracting folks. I mean, for a long time, I moved here in 2004, and it's always been like revitalize downtown.
Yeah.
Fourth Avenue Theater, housing.
Yeah.
How do we revitalize? Do you want to revitalize downtown? How do we get there and do these things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that obviously this last year with COVID and the pandemic has just, everything has been set back. But I think there are some signs of life downtown. There certainly were before. Cook Inlet Housing Authority had a new mixed-use building that went in. The Anchorage Downtown Partnership is doing some really exciting things. They're doing like facade improvement and that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot more that can be done. And we've seen other parts of the country that revitalizing downtown is crucial if you want to have a sort of vibrant community, because it's sort of like everyone's front porch, or I don't know what the analogy you want to use, but it's where people gather, it's where people get to know each other, and it's where you have a lot of concerts and entertainment and commerce. And so there are things we can do. One of the things I would like to do, working with the business community, is create pedestrian promenades, and the most likely one would be Fourth Avenue. And we've seen lots of other parts of the country have done this, where they'll shut off a street to traffic and allow seating outside, street performers, that kind of thing, and it really increases commerce. There was an AEDC luncheon a couple of years ago. I don't know if you were at that one, but there was a consultant there talking about how to revitalize.
Oh, was that the really high energy guy?
Probably.
I remember that one. Yeah.
My takeaways from that was 70% of shopping happens after 7 p.m. And you have to make a place that feels safe, particularly for women to want to be outside or at night and feel safe. And that
this goes back to the homelessness
on the
issue.
street.
That's something that's an issue downtown. Maybe not as bad. I mean, I remember years ago, it seemed for a while, you walk around certain places and you came across situations where it was a little scary.
So it means you have to have people living downtown, so you have eyes on the street. You have to have improved lighting. You have to have safety for pedestrians, and we have to work with the state, of course, because there's a trucking route that goes through downtown, and so we have to find a way to hopefully mitigate that and shift it if we can. Affordable housing is a big part of that, right? We have to have people actually living there. And you have to have things like, they're kind of counterintuitive, like a drugstore, like a CVS or a Walgreens. You have to have one of those. Like, those are the kind of things that make a place feel lived in and feel safer. But we can do these things. I mean, there really are opportunities, and we have to brand it too, right? We have to make Fourth Avenue or wherever this ends up being a real destination. And the last thing I'll say on this, the number one thing that visitors ask for on surveys that come to Anchorage is indigenous culture. And there's an opportunity, I think, for people of Anchorage to embrace the sense of indigenous place through partnerships with the museum, the Native Heritage Center, through investing in cultural tourism, through naming and signage, make this feel like an indigenous place. And that's one of the things that makes Anchorage, and it could make our downtown feel special too.
Yeah, with COVID, we've seen that a lot of folks who didn't think they could or didn't want to work remotely learned they could work remotely.
Yep.
And a lot of folks have talked about, myself included, we have a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, California, who are tech workers and live in very high cost places.
Right.
And they want to live in places like Anchorage, where we have the Chugach Mountains, half an hour drive away.
Yep.
And you can be in places that some people live their whole lives and they dream about it.
Right.
And we have all these great things. How do we attract those workers to Anchorage to live and work and play, I guess, right? Is that still a thing, live, work, play?
Absolutely it is. It's about quality of life. I mean, that's the number one thing. You have to offer a uniquely high quality of life. And you just highlighted, we have some advantages that other communities don't have. We have this spectacular natural setting. We have incredible diversity here in culture, in food, in language. We have that indigenous history. So there are things that would make this a uniquely attractive place to live, but there are some shortcomings right now. Affordable housing is really high on that list. The AEDC, I was a representative, I am still the Assembly representative to the Chamber of Commerce. I used to be to the AEDC, and those groups talk about this very often. Like when they're trying to recruit and retain employees, people often are disappointed by the sort of price point versus quality of the housing stock that they can get here. And that's why we need some new housing construction of a certain kind of sort of professional class. That's one thing. We have to have fiber. We have to have fiber optic. We have to have high-speed internet. And I know that ACS and GCI and even some other companies are working on this right now. Actually, when I was on the Assembly, I am still in the Assembly, but a couple years ago, I worked with John Weddleton and ACS to allow what's called micro-trenching, so to cut a very shallow, very small sort of trench in the municipal right-of-way where you can lay more fiber optic cable to make it cheaper to lay fiber optic cable. The administration actually fought us on that because they're trying to preserve the kind of the property asset that is the municipal right-of-way. But my point, and Mr. Weddleton's point, and we passed the ordinance, was we should be using municipal assets like the right-of-way, like the property holdings of the Heritage Land Bank, like the ACDA, to try to bring forward these kind of goals like affordable housing, high-speed internet, the things that will attract those people and keep those people here in Alaska that already live here, that can work anywhere. Right now, it's not totally clear this is going to redound to our benefit. This might end up with some people moving to Palm Springs or Hawaii or wherever and working for Alaskan companies. We want it to be the reverse. We want inflow of people.
Do you think we're doing enough, or do we need to do more to attract people, to make sure people know, hey, here's the things Anchorage has, to people living in Seattle, for example, or California and these tech areas?
Well, it's not just that. We also need to retain the best and the brightest here in Alaska. Brain drain's a real thing here, right? That people move out of the state.
I have a lot of friends with kids who graduate college and don't come back.
And so, I'm running for mayor because I don't think we're doing enough. Right. That's why I'm running. We have a 10-point business back plan for jobs and economic growth.
Nice plan.
Yes, thank you. But this is what, I was an economics major in college. I did economic development after college, and this is what really motivates a lot of my time in public service. I really want to develop economically Anchorage and diversify our economy, because resource extraction is always going to be a huge pillar of our economy. There's no question. But those are finite resources, and if we want our children and grandchildren to grow up here, we have to rely on other industries as well. And I'll say also, for the resource development industry, they don't want to be the only source of tax revenue either. They want other industries to exist here as well.
Several folks asked about trails, and obviously downtown there's trails downtown, but they're all over the city. We have some of the best, one of the best trail systems, probably arguably in the country.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on spending money and preserving the trails, not just for attracting folks, but for people who live here who really enjoy using the trails?
Yeah, well,
and the homelessness issue, which has been a problem in, especially Eastchester and parts of downtown.
Yeah, so I serve on the board of the Anchorage Park Foundation, and one of our goals is connectivity between the trails. I think that is our next real goal. The trails should meet up so that you can commute or just recreate and stay on the trail system basically the entire time. And we actually have some really exciting projects this year that passed the bond. So part of it is going to be bond money, but we can take that little pool of bond money and we can, through something called AMATs, we can leverage big pots of federal money. So we're doing that to build a new trail along Fish Creek, running from the coastal trail into the neighborhood. We're trying to we're going to connect the Ship Creek Trail better to the coastal trail. In my neighborhood, in East Anchorage, we're building the northeast, the Chugach Foothills Connector Trail. And again, to get people off of the Tudor Muldoon curve. So again, we want people to travel from basically any point in Anchorage to another without having to leave the trail system. We've also improved lighting on the trail. We've done things like run single track bike trails alongside the trail, and that activates the space to get to what you were talking about before, about people that are experiencing homelessness, that are living near the trails. I think we all are in agreement that it's not safe. It doesn't feel safe for the people that travel on the trails, and it's not safe for the people in those camps. We know that people living in those camps are disproportionately impacted. They're disproportionately the victims of crimes, violent crimes, property crimes, sexual crimes, unfortunately. So we need to find housing options so they aren't living in the camps. And then we're going to be abating the camps. And I'll say, you said something earlier that I thought was sort of interesting. You said that some folks just want to be out there. I gotta say that isn't my.
We talk to a lot of people who I would say, obviously, in some cases, probably had some addiction issues or mental health issues. But,
Yeah.
but we did talk to people who said, look, it's summertime. It's
Yeah.
the trails or the creeks here. It's pretty good to be here. In the winter, it's much more difficult. But they did tell us they were choosing to be there.
So I would say this. Well, I've done the point in time count where you go out and actually interview people and have those same kind of conversations. And in my experience, I have never had anyone say, I would rather be here than in a hotel room or here than in an apartment. They will say, I'd rather be here than in the shelter. Because the shelter, as you know, is a tough place to be. It's hot, it's crowded. This is all before COVID. It's hot, it's crowded. There's often people there who have victimized them criminally, just like we were talking about.
We saw that too, yeah.
Absolutely. And so they would rather be in the woods than in the shelter, but I haven't encountered, I'm not saying that people don't exist, but I think it's a very small number of people that would rather be there than in some kind of non-congregate housing where they have a locking door and can get a good night's sleep.
Well, something else we saw was some folks told us they came back because when they did get into housing, they were basically away from their friends.
Yeah.
And they came back because that was, in some sense, their community of people.
Yeah.
And when they go into certain situations, it's very strict on them, and they aren't able to. So it's like we said before, it's a very complicated issue. I want to talk a little bit about the budget. We talked about that before, so some of those questions we addressed, but I do want to go back to the high property taxes, like double the national average. And you said you don't support any kind of, I guess, sales tax or any other kind of tax to specifically offset property taxes. Do you support any other revenue to offset property taxes? And if so, how do we stop that from becoming just another revenue stream?
So we have, over the last 5 years, tried to do exactly what you're talking about. So we passed a fuel tax, we put it under the tax cap and offset property taxes. We sold MLMP, put the money into the trust, and that generates revenue that could be used for projects that otherwise might be funded through property taxes. I think a general sales tax is very unlikely to pass. So if it were to happen, it would have to come from the community. It would have to be the Chamber of Commerce and other community leaders coming together and saying, we really want this thing, and bringing it forward to the community. Because you need, under the tax cap, you've got to get 60% of the vote of the people to get it to pass. And we've never gotten anywhere close to that.
No, the COVID has obviously impacted this, but there has been more serious talk, I think, about an exclusionary sales tax in the summer to capture, once that comes back, hopefully down the road.
Right. So I think that we sort of have that with the bed tax, and when we've tried to raise the bed tax in the past, Visit Anchorage for understandable reasons, and the other folks engaged in the visitor industry have been very resistant to that because they feel like we're sort of unfairly targeting their industry, or we might impact the amount of people that come. So I think it's a really difficult balance. But again, I'll say I don't support a large jump in any of this kind of tax burden. I'll say the most likely place I see where you could offset property taxes would be a stormwater utility. But that's going to be a long and detailed conversation. So developers have come to us and said, we want a more uniform method of drainage projects. Right now, we fund drainage projects through property taxes, through bond issues. And there are some folks, some entities, like the federal government, for example, that don't pay property taxes. So what's happening is you in your house, or me in my home, we are subsidizing these large entities that don't pay property taxes.
I believe in, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think Providence Hospital isn't paying property tax, but
they
do
pay,
have a lot of water runoff, correct? I mean,
yes,
that was the topic that was a big concern there a few months ago.
They do have an impact, certainly on runoff. I think they pay property taxes on somewhere between like a fifth and a quarter of their physical plant. I mean, they pay some property taxes on some portions because they have for-profit entities in those buildings. They don't on the main nonprofit portion. But that's an example, right? So you are essentially subsidizing them. And a stormwater utility, which, and there are thousands of them all over the country, would be a cost causer, cost payer model. So you would have an additional bill, probably attached to your AWU bill, but it would offset your property taxes. And the hope is that that small bill would be more than what you were, I'm confusing this, but your property taxes would fall by a larger amount. That's right.
So you mentioned the tax cap, and I want to ask, We talked about the budget. You said there's been reductions made, but you don't think it can go down much more.
There are always places where you can find efficiencies, and I know that's what my opponent said. Mr. Bronson said.
Let's get that wide shot.
He would support.
The wide shot. Don't worry, we're limited on the wide shot. Again, folks, the printer had a problem with the sizing and it broke.
He has said that there would be deliberate cuts and run it like a business and look for efficiencies. I got to say that already happens. I mean, we know that happens. There are competent people at the municipality that are trying to do just that. We have, for example, shared services with the school district, and we're always looking for more opportunities. Shared facilities maintenance, for example, shared snow removal, so that we can cut costs in both places. But he needs to identify them. I mean, this is my point. If he wants to have major cuts, don't keep it a secret, Dave. Like we're all ears. If you had come last year when he started to get engaged in this thing to us at the budget and said, here are these places that we want to cut, we're always open to those kind of cuts. But right now we have a balanced budget, and we've worked really hard to deliver the same number of services. It's about crucial services, even as we're getting far less money from the state.
So I want to ask about the tax cap and bonding, because we've seen more bonding go for things like trails and police cars. Yeah. And the bonding is a way around the tax cap, correct? If you bond,
it's not a way around the tax cap. It's a way to ask the people of Anchorage if they want to increase the tax cap.
But it doesn't fall into the tax cap, right?
It increases the tax cap, and so it's a way to ask people of Anchorage, do you want to pay for this thing? Now, interest rates are low. We've been able to refinance a lot of that debt and save millions of dollars. But I think people are understandably still hesitant. They want to know that one of the bonds failed this year because it wasn't clear. Maybe two of the bonds failed this year because it wasn't clear.
There was 11, I think. Was it two? I think
two of them failed because they didn't. The public didn't believe that those were absolutely crucial projects, and they should believe that those are absolutely crucial projects.
But typically, most of the bonds normally do.
Yeah, they do.
Once in a while, there's a one-off.
Because again, people. The municipality provides core services. There isn't a lot of fluff, and when people see on their, they see on their ballot, would you like to, replace the roof at a school, or would you like to, repair a fire station? People generally vote yes because they see those things, and people talk about. Mr. Bronson talks about cutting government in the abstract, but when it comes time to actually identify things, like if you have chest pains, if you have a heart attack, you want a fighter to be there, EMT to be there quickly. That means you have to fund ambulances and compensate firefighters. And so when it comes time to make those kind of cuts, people are understandably resistant to it.
I want to talk a little bit about the assembly, and then if you're elected mayor, Mark Begich, Dan Sullivan, Rick Meister, they were all in the assembly, and they became mayor. You've been in the assembly for 5 years. You have I'd say a lot of friends or allies on the assembly. If you're elected mayor, how do you plan on separating yourself from the assembly where you've been for 5 years to being the leader and the executive of Alaska's largest city, which is very different than being on the assembly?
Absolutely. Well, I was fortunate that I had the opportunity to be the chair of the assembly twice, which is more of a sort of management and facilitation position. You manage the clerk's office and the assembly ombudsman, or the ombudsman and the assembly council. So I did have that opportunity, which is a little bit distinct from the normal assembly experience. I'll say I'm having conversations, of course, with the acting mayor, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and she's just going through this experience, right? She was on the assembly, now she's been the mayor, and we're having a lot of conversations about it. It is a very different role, and she, she has opened my eyes to certain things. But I would say the key is you have to have good people around you. You have to have a good management team. You have to be willing to accept that you don't know everything, obviously, and you need to have a lot of people with different experiences around you. So I'm going to look for an experienced municipal manager, an experienced chief of staff, experienced heads of different departments, so that we have that continuity of service. Again, we are about delivering those core public services.
One of the things I've heard from some people is that Bronson, they see him as maybe a check on the assembly. People who are frustrated with the assembly as a check on the assembly. If you were elected mayor, could you see that a lot of folks could be concerned that you're allied with a lot of the assembly members, and would you be willing to stand up to them on things that you didn't agree with them on? or that were contentious?
Well, sure. I mean, I've had plenty of disagreements with my colleagues over the years. I'll say that Mr. Bronson's approach of calling his future potential colleagues idiots and trash and the other things that he's said in his social media posts is not some way to get things done. It's a recipe for disaster, I think. Again, going back to this conversation with Ms. Quinn Davidson, I think that she has realized that just the way things are set up, the administration and the assembly, to a certain degree, have adversarial relationship. Just the way the system is set up. You know, the mayor is looking at the entire city, obviously. The assembly, we attempt to do that as well, but we also have our constituents. You know, we are much closer contact with our constituents, and so we are bringing much more specific issues. And in some ways, the assembly, by design, is sort of a headache for the administration. So I think absolutely, you know, I think I will be able to work with the assembly better than Mr. Bronson because, again, I have a professional relationship with them and I haven't denigrated them. But I also think that there will definitely be conflicts between the two, and we will be a check and balance on each other.
You mentioned surrounding yourself with people. I was going to ask you, who do you plan on pointing to some key city positions? Some names, and also you've said that you want to have a bipartisan administration. So could you name a few conservatives or Republicans that maybe you would name or consider for your administration?
I would not. I would rather not name names right now because that also implies that some people will be let go that I'm currently working with. Right. I will say the one that
Can
I
you give
have
us maybe just an idea of some people that you surround yourself with now that might have a role in the.
You know, again, I wouldn't want to, I really don't want to play this of you know, this person is going to be kept on, this person is going to be let go. I think that there probably will be a little bit more continuity between the current administration and mine versus Sullivan and, you know, Begich to Sullivan or Sullivan to Berkowitz. I think there probably will be some more continuity there. I have already said I was sort of put on the spot by at the debate last week. I do intend to retain the acting police chief as the police chief. Kenneth McCoy, he was the deputy police chief that I had been working with for the last several years. He's the most qualified person, I believe, in the department, and we intend to keep him on.
One of your former opponents, Bill Falsey, came on and endorsed you. He was municipal manager and municipal attorney in the past. Would he be somebody you'd consider bringing back? Is that something you've talked about with him?
I have not spoken about that with Mr. Falsey. I mean, he is a person of great ability. I'm not sure what role he would want. I don't know if he would want to go back.
He wanted to be mayor.
Well, so, you know, absent that, I'm not sure if that's what he sees in his future. But he is certainly a person of great ability, and I think anyone who was elected mayor should at least speak with him about his experience. But I haven't talked to him about that specifically, no.
And you touched on this last question here. You did mention as chair of the assembly that was kind of a quasi-executive position, but you haven't had really much executive experience going, if you win, to be the head of Alaska's largest city. I mean, how do you plan on navigating that, jumping right into this pandemic and this money, you know, this ARPA money and all these other issues we've discussed, you know, for the last hour?
I mean, I have an advantage over my opponent, certainly, that I'm currently doing the work. I mean, I am ready to go on day one. I'm spun up on these issues. But we do have about a month and a half of transition period, right? Between May 11th, more than a month and a half, between May 11th and the mayor being sworn in on July 1st, you have an opportunity to engage and have a transition team to converse more with the existing administration. There was an attempt earlier this year to shorten that period and make it so as soon as the mayor was elected, they became the mayor with no transition. I'm glad that didn't happen because I really intend to, as you say, try to navigate these waters by using that transition period, and you know, obviously lining up who is going to be in different roles and seeing what the issues are from the inside of the administration. Because once I'm elected, I think my role will be a little bit different. Obviously, it will be.
We're going to take a quick break. Last segment, I want to do some final questions.
Sure.
And we have a little surprise moment for you there. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. We're going to take one more break, and we're going to have our last segment and kind of final thoughts on our interview discussion. All right, folks, we're back here for the final segment of our not quite debate with Forrest Dunbar and Dave Bronson. We're going to do some final wrap-up questions, and then we're going to have a closing statement from Mr. Dunbar here. The first one I wanted to ask you was, what do you think is the best thing and the worst thing the Berkowitz administration did?
Oh, it's interesting.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. I think there are two really significant accomplishments that I wouldn't want to rank one above the other. One is the sale of MLMP, which was something that had been talked about for generations in Anchorage. That it didn't make sense that we had 3 power utilities, including MEA, and we were able to take those revenues, put them in the municipal trust, and generate interest forever, but also hopefully lower the cost of energy because you've been able to merge these 2 entities and create these economies of scale. That, obviously the Assembly played a big role in that too. It took a huge team to do that, and that took years, and that was a significant accomplishment. I think that was one. The other one I would point to is, of course, the rebuilding APD. Both the purchase of the headquarters, but more importantly, the additional 100 sworn police officers, the
which they got a great deal
staff, on. Not the police officers, but the headquarters.
The headquarters.
Yes. Although we get a great deal on our officers too.
The debacle with the legislature on that whole.
Yeah. So I would say those were both excellent. Trying to think of the worst. I don't hold on to things too long, so I try to avoid some of it. I mean, obviously the way that things ended, probably.
I figured you might say that.
Yeah, I would say, and that wasn't his administration. That was Ethan's own personal failing, and I'm sure he would say the same thing.
I want to ask you, if you're elected, you'll be we've talked about the mayor of Alaska's largest city, which involves working with the governor.
Yeah.
You've been kind of vocal, a supporter of the recall. You signed the recall, the first round. I don't know if you signed the second round or not. I just looked at the first.
Yes, but early on I did, yeah.
If you're elected, having supported the recall, how do you plan on working with the governor, which you'll have to do as a mayor of Alaska's largest city?
Well, I'm hopeful that we can all be professional. Our 2 Republican senators hopefully work with the Biden administration to get things for the people of Alaska. In the same way, I know actually that the acting mayor and Mr. Berkowitz both actually worked quite well with Mr. Dunleavy when it comes to different COVID issues, that they have a working relationship there. And I hope that we can develop that kind of working relationship too.
I think, and my understanding is the governor took kind of a, hand, like, you can do your thing and we're not going to get involved. When a lot of folks were pressuring his supporters base, you could say, pressuring him to get involved and criticize the Berkowitz on his decisions, which he never actually did.
Yeah,
the governor.
So I'm hopeful that we can be professionals. We should all be looking out for the public interest. It's about serving the people of Anchorage and the people of Alaska. And I trust the governor believes the people of Anchorage are part of that whole, the people of Alaska, right? And he wants to see what's best for these folks as well.
Maybe you guys can do like a team building summit.
Well, I mean, I'm certain that we will have disagreements on a lot of things, but someone told me once that there's nothing partisan about a pothole, and most of what municipal government does shouldn't be partisan. It's about road maintenance and snow removal and police and fire, so it shouldn't be partisan. And so when something comes up, an issue with the state, let's say like a transfer responsibility agreement when it comes to snow plowing, for example, when the municipality and the state are trying to figure out what street is being plowed by whom, I would hope that our administrations could work together without any kind of partisan politics on something like that. So I think the majority of issues shouldn't be partisan. The Port of Alaska, we haven't mentioned that yet tonight either, but Port of Alaska at Anchorage, the most important infrastructure project in the state. And I'm hopeful that we are all pulling on the same end of the rope. We are working with our federal delegation, we're working with our private partners to get federal funds, state funds, and the cargo tariff to rebuild that port. So I'm hopeful we can work together on that as well.
Last question. You first ran for Congress in 2014. That's when I got to know you. That's when most people, I think, got to know you.
Yeah.
And you ran for Assembly, second term in the Assembly. Now you're running for mayor. And you've been very involved in a lot of progressive campaigns. Is there a larger political ambition or goal? I mean, is there a larger trajectory for you to be a governor or senator? Is that part of it seems like to some people that kind of, you're going through the...
Yeah, some folks ask me about running for governor in 2022, I'm not going to. I'm not interested. I want to be the mayor of Anchorage. I assume that's why Mr. Dunleavy endorsed my opponent as well, is because they're worried about that kind of stuff, and maybe that's why Dan Sullivan's getting involved now too.
That was a question. I was going to do. You commit to the full term if that were to.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I have for the last 5 years on the Assembly have been, some might say, obsessively working on local government issues. And municipal government is not, I mean, this is one of the things that Mr. Bronson is doing. He's trying to bring these national issues when it comes to things like, he keeps mentioning Antifa, for example, bring these national issues into municipal government. That's not what we do here in the municipality. Municipal issues can be pretty obscure, and you have to work in them before I think you are the mayor. That's what I have been doing, and that's what I want to do, and that's what yeah, absolutely.
I go to the meetings, and believe me, I've joked. I mean, I don't think any amount of money could ever get me to be on. It's
usually
very arduous, like you said, and some of it's very boring.
It's for me. Yeah, I mean, I could see that. You get involved in it, and you get excited about zoning and building codes and things that. And the great thing about being on the Assembly and doing municipal work is that it's very close to people's lives, and so you can talk to constituents and directly work with them. And this is something that will be a little bit more difficult when I'm the mayor. I do think there will be a more of a level of remove, unfortunately. But I'll just give you one example. If we have time for one anecdote.
No, we have. What time is? So, this isn't TV. We can just go for.
Well, I don't want to exhaust the audience either, but there was a woman who sent me an email. She lived near Standish Park, which is this very small kind of pocket park in East Anchorage, and she had been shot. A bullet had come through her wall and hit her in the leg. And it had, because of some crazy drug deal or whatever it was. This is a number of years ago, and I said, well, did you talk to the police? What can we do? And she's like, yeah, that's all. That's going to happen. What's going to happen is going to happen. What I want you to do, they are engaging in this activity in Standish Park because there's no lighting. I want you to improve the lighting in Standish Park. And so I went to the administration. And we found sort of leftover LED. They had done an upgrade along one of the trails, and they had some leftover LEDs. And so we installed new lighting at this park. And that was what she asked for, and we were able to do it. And that's the kind of thing that municipal government is about. A constituent comes to you and says, I have this problem in my neighborhood. Can you help solve it? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But you should at least try. That's what municipal government's about.
Last thing before we finish. I was going to do a segment where I would ask each of you to give a compliment towards each other. Now, obviously Dave can't do that, but if you did want to have anything positive to say about your opponent, I mean, you guys have been going back and forth for the last almost year, so.
Well,
you can talk to me. You can talk to the cardboard thing if you want.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward. I really have. I met Mr. Bronson for the first time last week. I'd never met him before. I hadn't seen him at a community council. I hadn't seen him. I knew he'd been out in the audience, and I think he testified a couple times, but I'd never actually talked to him or met him. And he didn't come. Well, we were kind of socially distanced, but so he came to the KTUU in-person event, and that was the first time I met him.
Wow. So you'd never talked to him because he was at a lot of the Assembly meetings, like you said, over the.
No, he wasn't at a lot. Maybe he was in the audience. I don't know.
Some I was at. He was testifying, or he was.
Yeah, he testified, but not before that. I mean, he really hadn't come.
After the summer.
Yeah, but so again, I don't really know him. I've heard he has a wonderful family, and I know he's posted pictures of his family that he's proud of. I think that's something that I could compliment him on. He's certainly passionate about his issues, and he's got passionate supporters, and they are working hard and running a strong campaign. But I don't really know much about him. I haven't got to know him. And on a lot of the things he says about policy, he's either mistaken or he is deliberately trying to mislead people about my record or about where the municipality is at.
Well, Forrest Dunbar, I want to thank you for coming here for our kind of debate and taking the time to be here on a Sunday night. I want to give you a few minutes to do a closing statement, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I probably won't use a couple minutes because
we've
been speaking a lot. So I guess for those of you that hung in there for this incredibly, it was just a lot of me and Jeff talking. I mean, I hope that I was able to provide some insight into what our goals are, my understanding of the municipality, and what hopefully we can accomplish in the years to come. I think we've gone through a really tough year here in Anchorage, but I still think Anchorage is a really special place. And I know my opponent has painted it as this awful place, where crime in the streets and all of these other things. And we certainly do have issues that we need to address. Crime is too high. I agree with that. We have to alleviate homelessness. I agree with that too. But there is still a lot that's great about Anchorage, and it can be even better. We're going to have a strong economic recovery this summer using federal funds that are coming our way post-COVID, and then we're going to diversify our economy. We're going to revitalize downtown. We're going to have more affordable housing. We're going to attract and retain new industries. We're going to improve the visitor economy. We're going to make this an even better, more prosperous place. And so I'm hopeful that you will join my coalition as we go forward. A record number of people have already voted for this point in the election. So people are making their voices heard. And so I want to say thank you to everyone that has supported us so far. And if you vote for me, I promise to do right by you and the city. If you don't vote for me, I still will be your mayor because we're in this together. We are here for the municipality of Anchorage. Thank you.
Thanks, Forrest. I want to again thank Scott Jensen and Carolyn Hall from Jensen Hall Creative for being the great producers of the show. I want to thank the Anchorage Police Department Employee Association for sponsoring the debate. And folks in Anchorage, make sure to vote. The ballots are due in the bin, the drop box, or postmarked by May 11th. So, and as Mr. Dunbar said, so far it's pretty high turnout. So you have till May 11th to vote. Thanks for tuning in and watching our kind of debate. And again, we did invite we went to extreme lengths to make sure we wanted to get Mr. Bronson here, and he chose not to be here. So we have no control over that. But thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for more events and debates as we go forward here in our new studio.